Okay. Thank you all for joining KSU's Franchise Management Speaker Series, Management 4124. The speaker series includes CEOs, private equity firm leaders, bankers, entrepreneurs, and advisors. We are in a classroom on the KSU campus where the cameras unfortunately only face front and in the top of the ceiling for some reason. So it may seem like I'm looking down and by myself, but which perhaps my students tonight would prefer, but in all reality, it allows me to look at my class. My name is Jordan Krolick, Professor of Franchise Management. My non-professor life is as an independent equity sponsor, consultant, and senior leader with companies such as McDonald's, Arby's, Home Depot, and more. Today, we are excited to have Dr. Ben Litalien. He's invested 3 decades in the franchise community with a broad range of executive management and franchise building experience in the United States and abroad. Ben is the founder and principal of Franchise Well, LLC, dedicated to the improvement and enhancement of franchising. He is also on staff at Georgetown University School of Continuing Education and is also an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland. Ben has developed and sold 4 franchise concepts and is a recognized speaker on franchising for good. Most interestingly, he was on the 1999 winning Indy 500 pit crew for AJ Foyt Jr. Racing. I'm sure that's a great story. Given his expertise, I hand it over to Ben. And Ben, thanks so much for joining us today.
Certainly my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I apologize at the onset. My allergies are in full bloom, and so I've got a little bit of nasal going on here, but hopefully this will all work out fine. So great. Sorry I couldn't be there in person to meet with you, and love to learn more about your class, but in the time that we have, we've got a heady topic to talk about. And this notion of social franchise, and you're in a franchise management program, so your instructor there is well-versed in franchising. So we won't spend a lot of time talking about franchising and the franchise model because you've got that covered. What I would like to share with you this evening is this notion of a social franchise, nonprofit organizations engaging the franchise model. And the outcome of it could be described as creating community wealth. If you've heard of Billy Shore, he's the founder of Share Our Strength, which is a national hunger relief for children program with Jeff Bridges and many other celebrities. He has written several books on this around developing community wealth. So we're going to talk for a few minutes about bringing together 2 sectors, the franchise sector and the nonprofit sector. Now, you're getting a lot of education on the franchise sector, but this evening I would like to introduce you to the nonprofit sector. It's twice the size of the franchise sector.
Wow.
That blows most people away. So what is a social franchise? There's a definition, which I actually proffered in one of my research papers, but and you may not be surprised to learn that there's not a tremendous amount of academic research on social franchising. It was the topic of my dissertation, the theory of social franchising. So a social franchise is a nonprofit owned franchise business. So you're likely, you know what Goodwill is. Goodwill, maybe you know it from their thrift stores. But if a Goodwill owned a Subway franchise and they put it in their thrift store or adjacent to their thrift store, that would be considered a social franchise. So it's any franchise on the market that anyone might want to buy. It just happens to be owned by a nonprofit organization. We'll talk about why that is and what their attraction is to it. It's typically—
So it's not a franchise in itself. They're all, their own stores.
Well, no, I guess that's what you'll hear as we go along. We're going to unravel that Goodwill is a franchise in and of itself. and yet they don't fall under the FTC guidelines, so they're exempt from the franchise rule. So when you think about this construct of a social franchise or a nonprofit owning a franchise, the nonprofit will typically form a subsidiary. Nonprofit organizations have all the same rights as for-profit corporations. They can have any number of subsidiaries. Those subsidiaries can be wholly owned, they can be joint ventured, and they can be for-profit or not for profit, so long as the income derived from their for-profit activity is less than 15% of their total revenue as a nonprofit. So I know in the time we have, there's a lot more information in here I can share with you, but let's talk now about what is social franchising. So social franchise, nonprofit owns a franchise business. Social franchising is where a nonprofit scales itself or a program using the franchise model. So there's really two different, completely different worlds in this social franchise arena. Nonprofits that own franchise businesses and nonprofits that use the franchise model to scale a program for themselves. I don't know if you've talked about corporate structure, but a nonprofit is a 501c3. That's their business designation, as opposed to a C Corp, S Corp, LLC. There are also increasingly B Corp or benefit corporations that are for profit with a stated mission. A lot of millennials who are engaging in social franchising are opting for B Corp or L3C, which is an LLC with a stated social mission. It is also a for-profit entity. The goal in using social franchising is sustainability. As you can imagine, a lot of nonprofits struggle to raise enough money to support their good works. And so having a franchise model as their expansion platform, the idea is that it will be self-sustaining over time. Thus, the mission doesn't have to end. The problem with nonprofits that are volunteer-based and donation-based is if the donations stop, the mission stops.
Ooh.
So those are the two things we're going to talk about. Let me help you understand the nonprofit sector. Today in the US, 1.6 million 501c3. That is literally more than double the size of the entire franchise community, which is around 794,000 franchises in the US. The amount of workforce engaged in the nonprofit sector, 10% of the US workforce, 25% of Americans volunteer. Now, a lot more than that do, it's just not recorded. But of those who fill out the form, 25%. 5.6% of the US GDP is derived through nonprofit organizations. And when you look at the amount individuals and corporations give, it's staggering, $428 billion. So this is a sector that may be as big an anomaly to you as the franchise sector was when you started this class. But suffice it to say, it is a huge component of our economy. Now, some of these brands you'll recognize, right? I mentioned Goodwill, but did you know that the Goodwill has 167 franchisees, what we would call area developers? These are charter memberships, they call them, but it operates just like a franchise agreement. It gives them a territory, a license to the trademark, and they exercise great control over what time you can open and close, what you can and can't do. So it meets, in general, the three ingredients the FTC uses to define a franchise. The one thing that most people overlook is the FTC says those three elements, license to a brand, significant control or support, payment of a fee, those have to be underneath an umbrella of ongoing commercial relationship.
And Ben, their midterm is next week, so they absolutely have to know those three elements.
Now it's a refresher for you. Perfect. So what really is important is that this umbrella over those three elements, an ongoing commercial relationship. The IRS, that's the entity that grants the exemption for for an organization to be a 501c3, has granted an exemption to Goodwill. What they do is almost identical to what McDonald's or Subway does from the standpoint of franchising. They're simply not under the FTC franchise rule because they're considered exempt, because they don't believe, the IRS, that the relationship the Goodwill has with their affiliates is an ongoing commercial relationship. You might ask, what is it then? Their stated mission is to create employment opportunities for people with barriers to entry in the workplace, minorities, people with disabilities, etc. And so because that is what they're trying to do, and they use their retail stores as training and vocational environments, they are not under the franchise rule. But look at the size of this organization, 167 affiliates, 3 billion. That's they have 3,000 thrift stores operating in the United States today. Those thrift stores pay 4% of their retail sales to Goodwill International under what we would call as a royalty. They call it a membership fee. So other brands that you might recognize, YMCA, 6 billion in revenue. Campfire USA, 3.5 billion in revenue. Young Women's Christian Association, YWCA, 2 billion. The one that's the most captivating to me is the Boys and Girls Club. Look at this stat, 4,300 locations, only 190 million in revenue. Now, one of you smart students out there, if you figure out what those 4,300 affiliates could operate as a franchise that would fund their mission, you will have conquered a major feat in the world. So what these organizations are looking for in acquiring franchises is support, revenue generation, job creation, awareness in their marketplace. The reality is, though, in the nonprofit sector, most of the brands are local. So you see 5 examples here. C-Mark up in Woburn, Mass. Owns a Money Mailer franchise. West Tab has affordable Section 8 housing complexes under the HUD program. They own a handyman franchise called Andy on Call.
Hey, Ben,
yeah.
I have one of the class members wants to ask a question.
Sure.
Hey, so my name's Avery, and just to be curious, is this just people taking advantage of our current tax system to almost scam the government and use what exists for their own benefit?
So the IRS has put in a multitude of safety precautions so that those that are granted the 501c3 status have to meet those rigorous requirements. Otherwise, they would lose their exemption. The other thing to keep in mind is that even though the underlying nonprofit doesn't pay tax on their revenues, the franchise they operate oftentimes does pay tax. So one of the examples I'll show you is a nonprofit that owns a UPS store franchise, but they operate it as a for-profit subsidiary and they pay taxes just like any other UPS store franchisee would. So are there abuses? Not that I'm aware of, because there's only a few hundred social franchises in the country. This is very new, fertile ground. But I think when you look at the IRS information on malfeasance in the nonprofit sector, it finds itself in like the Red Cross. You may look back historically when the Red Cross had 5 private jets and the IRS stepped in and said, guys, this is not acceptable. We are not going to give you, a pass on federal income tax, and you're going to use that to go buy 5 private jets so you can fly around the country. So the IRS requires all of the financials of a 501c3 to be published annually. You can go to guidestar.org and you can pull up any nonprofit in the United States and look at their actual financials. It has to disclose all of their executives, all of their pay, all of their benefits, where they spend their money, every category. So the government has done a really great job of building a safety net around this. What's interesting is that nonprofits that engage in franchising have to make decisions. Is this aligned with our mission? And if it's not, then it's going to be taxed just like any other business is taxed. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
My pleasure. All right, we'll just slide down here. When you say nonprofit, you have to designate a sector. So you can't just be a general nonprofit. You have a lot of forms to fill out. It takes on average today about 13 months for the IRS to either accept or reject an application to be a 501c3. In that application, which is very, very extensive, you have to disclose what sector you're going to operate in. So as you can see, human services is the largest. And these are organizations that serve veterans, the homeless, disabled, barriers to entry of employment, a lot of anything related to human services falls into this. It is the largest group. You can see the organization that you're in right now, KSU, I mean, is part of this 18%. It's a nonprofit organization in the education space. But what I like to show this because there's a large segment. You can see here, religion, 6%. Well, of the 1.6 million, that's a relatively small number, but it's one that we're generally aware of. Now, one of the reasons it's so small is that the FTC and the IRS have ruled that a church, quote unquote, or religious organization is exempt from federal taxation per se, meaning they don't have to apply for the application of the 501c3. They can just claim it by being a religious organization. So if any one of you wanted to start a church in your apartment or your basement, you could put out a shingle and say, this is Jordan's, church, and any revenue that you generated, Jordan, you would not be held liable for taxation unless you were found to be fraudulent. So
Is this percentage dollars or is this percentage number of organizations?
Number of organizations of the 1.6 million, 6%. So when sorry, this mouse is too sensitive here. Okay. One thing that staggers a lot of people when they look at this 1.6 million, it's like the size of it, of course, but what they often don't understand is 70% of the revenues that are generated are from business activities. They call it earned income, right? So again, those Goodwill retail stores create earned income. And so when you think about a nonprofit, a lot of people have this notion of somebody on a corner holding their hat out and asking for donations, or United Way sends you something in the mail, that they survive only on donations. The reality is 70% of the sector revenue is generated from them operating a business. So maybe you've heard of Volunteers of America. Donate your car to us and we will give it to a worthy cause. Well, a lot of the cars that get donated get refurbished and sold, and it generates a lot of revenue that they use to support their mission. So the car might not actually go to the recipient, but the money raised from the sale of it does. So first and foremost, the nonprofit sector is busy conducting business. They're not just donation receiving organizations. Having said that, the donation component often comes with a restriction. So wealthy families, many times for tax purposes, hopefully for other purposes, but they'll donate to a nonprofit, but they will often earmark that or restrict its use to something very specific, like building a building or a special program So the nonprofit can't use those funds to pay the light bill, to pay salaries. They have to use it for that restricted purpose. It has to have direct mission impact. So this is a little bit about what's called social enterprise. The business activities in the nonprofit sector is referred to as social enterprise. And what this is just generally saying is that they operate businesses. You know, they're not just people just doing good, but don't have any business background, business acumen. The goodwill, if you can imagine, their board of directors has celebrities, philanthropists, and very smart CEOs from a wide variety of industries. Most of these larger nonprofits have a C-suite that will rival any corporate C-suite in America. So the sector is big, and there are some big players there. A lot of them are smaller and local, but I can tell you that of the 1.6 million, 500,000 of them, 500,000 organizations have an annual operating budget over $10 million. So these are significant organizations in many ways. Now, when they start thinking about franchise and how it might apply to them, they have to work off of this focus continuum, right? If you look to the left, they have to have a mission focus or they will lose their 501c3 status. They can have a profit focus, but it can't be more than 15% of their total revenues generated. Think about that. So Goodwill has $3 billion in revenues generated, right? At 15%, they could afford to buy a lot of franchises. They could operate a lot of franchise businesses and make tens of millions of dollars before ever getting close to, you know, scrutiny of the IRS on their activities, or it being jeopardizing their 501c3 status. What's really in the middle is this, what I call self-sustainable focus, using the franchise model to help them be sustainable. Again, keep in mind, there's two sides of the coin. Do we scale a program using the franchise model, or do we buy franchises and operate them? So sustainability is the focus of the nonprofit sector. If our mission is worthwhile and worthy, how do we prolong it? How do, you know, when is homelessness over? No. So if your mission is addressing homelessness, you don't want your mission to end until homelessness is eradicated, right? Or hunger relief, or whatever it is that your mission is, you want that to go on forever, and you need sustainability. Now, you may not know, but if you're a 501c3, the capital markets aren't efficient. You can't go public. You can't raise funds. You can't go out and do a private placement. You're very restricted on how you can generate revenue. So on the other side of the coin, you're not held to the same corporate standards that a for-profit is held to. The one area that's most striking to me is you have no restriction on how much cash you can amass. I know of an organization, a nonprofit organization that was founded by a famous football player that has a $15 million operating budget, but they have $45 million in cash in the bank.
Wow.
Just sitting there. They call it a rainy day fund, meaning that if they stop tomorrow, any kind of income, they could go, you know, for many, many years on their reserves.
Yeah, I got to join that climate, Ben.
Yeah, you do. So again, thinking about the nonprofit sector and the franchise sector, what do franchisors want? They want growth. They want to sell franchises. They want to plant flags. They want their brand to develop, right? So growth and brand development. Well, what does the nonprofit benefit from buying franchises, right? They're going to help the franchisor grow, but they're going to have unrestricted income from operating that business. They're also, in many cases, looking for job training platforms. Undoubtedly, you have talked about in your class, franchisees are independent contractors. And in order to maintain that independence, the franchisor cannot get involved in the franchisee's human resource activity. Hiring, training, and managing people, that is the responsibility of the franchisee, not the franchisor.
Another topic
Nonprofit.
from today's discussion before
There
we
you
end.
go. So good. So nonprofits look at franchises they own as job training platforms. Many of my clients who are nonprofits that own businesses use that platform to train people with disabilities. I'll give you a little homework if you're interested. I'm sure Jordan's given you plenty, but just go Google, go Google Undercover Boss and watch the Subway episode. The president of Subway was taken undercover to a Subway store to work in, and he had no idea this actual franchise existed. It's owned by a Baptist church in New York, and they put the franchise in their community center, and they use it for job training for African-American men, a 6-month program to get them into the food service sector working full-time, and have had phenomenal results. And they make money operating the unit. Well, when he goes in there to work undercover, he has to excuse himself. He breaks down crying. He's just so blown away by what's being accomplished under the brand. So job training is definitely a key part. When a nonprofit thinks about franchising, they have to look at the one thing they don't bring to the table that has been the stalwart component of franchise success, and that's the passion of the owner. This is what has sustained the franchise model for 40 years of history. That passion of the owner is hard to replicate with an employee. But the nonprofit's not going to have that, because they are going to run this like a program. It's never going to supplant their mission. So they have to leverage their assets into a competitive advantage. So the first thing they have to say is, what are our assets that we can leverage? And then they have to have a criteria, right? Are they going to be comfortable operating convenience stores, selling beer and cigarettes and whatever? Are they going to be comfortable operating a gun range franchise? So they have to look at their culture and put up some parameters or filters. And then they have to find the right company to work with. I had a franchise, a nonprofit interested in owning a Tide dry cleaner. I don't know if you're familiar, but Tide is owned by Procter & Gamble. It's a laundry detergent by and large. Now they've taken that and leveraged it through franchising into a dry cleaning franchise. And I had a very large nonprofit who wanted to own a Tide dry cleaning franchise. But at the end of the day, they chose not to because they weren't the right match. They couldn't meet with Procter & Gamble. They couldn't have a seat at the table. They were just another franchisee in the machine, and that didn't work for them. So these are 3 key filtering mechanisms. When you think about assets that they have, nonprofits have assets that they have. This is a goodwill example, like retail outlets, excess space. Many of them own land and building because they were donated to them. And yet some of them are highly valued. I'll give you a quick example. I had a client, it was actually a church in Florida that had been there for 50 years, but the land around them became so valuable, they were able to sell their land, take the cash, go buy another piece of property farther out of town, and they went to the bank to get a loan to build their new church building, and the bank wouldn't give them a loan. And one of the men that was there said, he actually worked for Ponderosa Steakhouse, which is a franchise. And he said, I guess if we were borrowing money to build a franchise, we could get a loan. And the banker said, absolutely. Franchises are good investments. You bring me a franchise you want to put on that property, I'll finance it. Well, they'd never heard of such a thing, but they called me and we started talking, and we did an analysis of their market. As it turned out, early childhood education, everyone around them was completely full, and they were on 6-month waiting lists to get their kids in. So we found a franchisor called Children's Lighthouse who agreed to sell us a franchise for that piece of property. Before it opened, it was completely sold out. After the first month of operations, they went back to the bank, borrowed money, and added a wing and added another 300 kid capacity, and it immediately sold out. This one franchise in the right location was an amazing competitive advantage. Now, these early childhood education companies couldn't go get that location. It had to be brought to them because it was owned by that local church. So that's an example of leveraging assets. Also, the businesses they operate, the things they do, right? For example, job coaching, in-home care, manage assets, manage programs. These are attractive in different franchise systems. And then most importantly, going back to that local influence, franchisees that have local influence operate at a higher level and more profitable. It's just a fact. Being known in your community. Well, nonprofits are very well known in their community, not just in their community. Most of them know the people at the highest level in the government. I have been to many nonprofit franchise openings where the governor of the state comes to the ribbon cutting because of the relationship they have with that nonprofit. Okay, just a couple of quick examples. I want to get more questions. Early on, there was a nonprofit that had an opportunity to open Auntie Anne's Pretzel in Denver International Airport. It opened, and within a couple of months, it was the highest grossing Auntie Anne's franchise in the country out of 4,000 plus locations. It was incredibly successful. They opened a second unit. Unfortunately, 10 years into this amazing relationship, the airport authority sold the rights to all the food service to a institutional feeding company who basically kept the Auntie Anne's in, but booted them out as the franchisee. So one of the I'd say more disappointing situations that I researched was Ben and Jerry's. Now, everybody loves Ben and Jerry's, right? It's a great product. And Ben and Jerry are one of those B corporations that I mentioned earlier. They operate as a B corporation. And they thought it would be great to offer nonprofits their franchise, and they call it a partner shop, and they wouldn't charge any franchise fees and only like a 1% royalty. Well, 40 nonprofits jumped at the opportunity to own a Ben and Jerry's ice cream. Unfortunately, there's only 3 operating today. And so when I did the research, I found that neither side was prepared for the other. Ben and Jerry's didn't understand the nonprofit sector. The nonprofits didn't understand the retail sector. And you can see some of the things in here. Most of the issues were avoidable, but this really slowed down the progression of social franchising because this got a lot of coverage about these failures, right? And so in my dissertation,
still got to run a good business.
Yes, you can't set aside the franchise standards because you're mission minded. So a couple other, sorry, this mouse is really finicky. I'll give you an example. It's a couple of clients that I've worked with. Eggleston, you've never heard of it, but it's about a $90 million organization working out of Norfolk, Virginia. And they serve a variety of people with disabilities, barriers to entry to work. And Mrs. Eggleston was a very wealthy woman who basically donated her estate and created Eggleston. And it's been going on for about 60 years now. But their goal was to become more well-known in their community. You know, nonprofits really struggle with being known. And so they ended up purchasing a Link staffing franchise. Now, in the temporary business, you know everybody in town, right? Because you need to know all the employers, who needs temporary people. And so this has been going on for 20 some years, this franchise now. I mean, 10, 13 years now, 13 years. And while it makes them money, their primary focus was to become known in their community. And if you were to call up the CEO of Eggleston, he would tell you, even if we lost money with this franchise, I would have still done it because the amount of revenue we generate from all the connections that we made being known in this community was millions and millions of dollars. So nonprofits may look at franchise sector as a way to create awareness in the local community. Here's an example of vocational training. Did Lake is about a $60 million nonprofit in the Northern Virginia market. I helped them buy 2 UPS stores. They use these UPS stores as training platforms for adults with disability to work in a retail environment, to learn how to package, how to ship, how to weigh, how to treat, interact with customers, how to sort mail. The jobs that are in here are jobs that are transferable in the community. And so it has been a really amazing journey. Now, just you might note this last bullet. The first unit they opened cost them about $230,000 to open. They've operated it profitably since 2015. And they're now going to sell it for $800,000 cash. I mean,
It's clever. I mean, Ben, what you're doing is beyond clever. I mean, in our community here, the 2 churches, at least where I live, have the most central locations, and they're the largest landowners.
and look at their membership base. Yeah.
And with 10,000 people in each one, they're close to it. It would make perfect sense. I never thought of it. I mean, it's just very, very interesting.
And then the last example is a pure for-profit. Lakeview Center is part of the Baptist healthcare community. And when they approached me, they said, we know how to do our mission. We just have unfunded programs. How can we make money that we can use to support these programs? So, they opened 3 Dairy Queen Grill and Chill in Florida. They spent about $3 million because 1 or 2 of them, they own the land, the building. So about $3 million investment. And they operated this for about 8 or 9 years. They recently sold the 3 of them for $12 million cash. So the story here is that whether you're a nonprofit or not, the research is clear. Franchise businesses sell for a higher value than non-franchise businesses. That's a fact. Now, nonprofits, what they like about the franchise model is that they're not married to it forever. Think about a nonprofit that opens up a local bakery, right? They operate it. It may or may not make money, but then who do they sell it to when they want to liquidate? Whereas they open a franchise like a UPS store or a Dairy Queen Grill and Chill, there's a ready market to buy these franchises and at a higher multiple. So those are all social franchises. Let's talk for a minute about social franchising and then see what questions you have. So when you get a chance, look at Jibu. It's JIBUCO, jibuco.com. This was a father and son who came to me 8 years ago and said, we want to do something in East Africa to address the water issue. So we created a retail franchise store where we would take a small footprint, about 800 square feet. We would put a machine in there that could take water from any source and filter it so that you had government certified clean drinking water. And we would sell it at radically affordable prices. So the markets we went into had very small, wealthy population and a very large, lower population, virtually no middle class. For example, Rwanda, the first market we went into. Well, just because of the time we have, I'll tell you that today we're in 8 countries with 4,000 franchises, and it's completely self-sustainable. Now, we did this model, Jibu, as a L3C. We were the first ever L3C, well, actually the first ever profit organization to get grants from the USAID because of the work we did. We kind of opened that door. Just to give you a glimpse, we're right now going through what's called a SPAC. If you guys haven't talked about SPACs, Jordan can fill you in on what that's, but it's basically creating a public company and then attaching it to an actual business. And so it's quite interesting, but we are doing a SPAC now to create liquidity, raise capital, and grow beyond our borders in Africa. So this is literally using the franchise model as the scaler for a mission-minded concept.
We have a question from the class.
Yes.
Hey, Ben, my name is Jake. I have a quick question. You said a lot of companies that are nonprofit, like churches, they'll take their business or their face and put it on like you said, a UPS store or maybe even a Dairy Queen. Are they having to pay taxes on the money the Dairy Queen makes or the UPS store?
It depends. So the real decision they have to make is what we're doing for our mission, or is it to make money? The IRS has said, we don't care how much money you make. If your focus is to do this to support your mission, then it's non-taxable. So in some cases, I have clients who have said, we're going to use this for job training in the real world, not in a sheltered workshop, not out back in some Quonset hut, but in the real world, in a real business. We're going to teach people how to have skills they can transfer to jobs in the community. In those cases, they believe that they're aligned with their mission, and therefore they operate under their 501c3 status. In the case of the Lakeview, they said, absolutely. If we don't employ anybody with a disability, our focus here is to invest, make money, and use it to support our mission. They paid taxes on every dollar that was generated in that business.
Okay, thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Other questions?
When you, do you find that a lot of the people or the nonprofit organizations, are they looking at this, or they just don't know? There's not enough knowledge out there to show that this is a great opportunity, because the daycare thing seems to be a no-brainer.
Yeah. So by and large, the nonprofit sector knows as little about franchising as the franchise sector knows about nonprofits. I became very captivated by it for a variety of reasons, but it's so much so that I literally went back to get my doctorate to research this. And that's why this is what my dissertation is on. So I guess I've probably been responsible for a lot of the education. I've spoken at the Goodwill International's National Convention. There's another organization called Source America. It's an honest broker agency of the US government to match up nonprofit organizations with set aside government contracts. If you get a chance, look up sourceamerica.org. There's about 1,600 nonprofits in that network. I have spoken with them, and many of the nonprofits I've worked with have come out of that organization. So I either get contacted by a nonprofit saying, hey, we've heard about this, we want to learn more, or yeah, that's pretty much the way it's been. It's people have reached out to me. Now, where it has manifested itself where I haven't been involved is a nonprofit might have a board member like Jordan or someone else who has experience in the franchise community. And they say, well, hey, if we're going to open up a deli, why wouldn't we put a Subway? Wouldn't that be smarter than trying to figure out what equipment to buy, what products to buy, what recipes to create? You know, everything's already done for us. So where I've run into this is where there's been a franchise person who's involved with a nonprofit and asked the question. And then they've started doing their due diligence, and lo and behold, you wake up and they own a franchise. So yeah, so that's really been the crux of it. It's something that's developing, but because of the first question of abuse, what to me would be a shame is if the franchise community, you know, because of their desire to sell franchises, started calling on nonprofits and trying to sell them a franchise without them knowing. This is what happened with Ben and Jerry's. Ben and Jerry said, hey, we'll waive the franchise fee. Well, as you all know, as students of franchising, the initial franchise fee is the least expensive part of owning a franchise. It's like a one and done. You spend 30 grand. Yeah, but over the next 10 years, that investment to open that business might be $250,000. So waiving the franchise fee seemed to these nonprofits like, wow, they're giving it to us, but they didn't give it to them. They still, just to press this home, the YWCA in Dallas, Fort Worth was one of the early ones that was awarded a franchise. By the time they opened their little Ben and Jerry's ice cream shop, they had spent $750,000. They operated it for 18 months and never made a penny. They lost money every month for 18 months. And then to get out of it, they had to pay off the landlord the balance due on their lease. So it was about $1.2 million, $1.3 million gone, right? And the executive director told me, that's not even the worst part of it. It's the confidence my donors lost in our ability to operate efficiently and effectively, right?
Sure.
So yeah, there's the last thing I want is a feeding frenzy of franchisors coming into the nonprofit sector, because nonprofits need to be educated on franchising before they go down this path.
So Ben, I can't thank you enough for your time. We have one final question, but before I get to that, I just want to thank you for your time. I didn't, I'm a professor, and this is a great knowledge for me to even learn. It's a wonderful specialty that you found yourself into. And so we have one last question.
Yeah.
Hey, so I know you mentioned earlier that a hospital was using the Dairy Queens to help raise money.
Mhm.
Not be possible for them to do something like hospitals across the country of using some franchise to help with physical therapy, and just using that to help pay off or lower the medical costs across the hospital?
Yeah, from your lips to God's ear, as the saying goes, right? Yes, I think that hospitals are perfectly poised to operate a physical therapy franchise, an urgent care franchise, a fitness center. I mean, they've already got a captive audience, and so the revenue that they could generate from the for-pay customers could literally offset for those who can't afford, right? And so it could be what I call a self-funded program. When I talk to nonprofits about social franchise, they're like, why should we do this? I said, do you need another unfunded program? If you're gonna have a program, let it pay for itself. That's what I call that self-sustainable focus on that continuum. Why not invest in something that will pay its own way, and all of the net income or net earnings in the nonprofit sector lingo could be used for whatever you want in support of your mission, as you suggest, drive down healthcare costs, et cetera. So I think that social franchise and social franchising holds great promise for the nonprofit sector, but you have to go in with your eyes wide open. You have to be educated on the franchise model, and you have to make good decisions, because there's a lot at stake if you get it wrong.
Well, Ben, again, we thank you for joining KSU's Franchise Management Speaker Series, and we really appreciate this. This is great, and we look
It's
forward.
absolutely my pleasure. My information's there. If you have any other questions, I'd be happy to be in touch with you and address those. But thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ben. Be well.
You too.